At issue this week, young voters, where do they stand in this midterm election year? New insight into how they're feeling. Are politics stressing you out? You're not alone. Ahead, which party is feeling that stress more? A new survey has the answer. And from medicine to politics, the doctor who helped lead efforts to test and vaccinate Philadelphians during the pandemic now wants to represent our area in Congress. I'm sitting down with Dr. Stanford for the first in our series of interviews with the Democratic candidates in the competitive primary in the race to fill an open seat in one of the bluest districts in the nation.
NBC10 at Issue starts now.
I'm Lauren Mayk. Welcome to NBC10 at Issue. A recent poll shows President Trump's approval rating below 40%. Part of that could be due to younger people. The president is losing support from voters age 18 to 29 faster than any other voter demographic. That group is particularly frustrated over the war with Iran.
We are suffering here, and there's this great promise of long-term gain, but that's what's been said to us for years.
Joining us now to discuss this poll is Mark Trussler, a senior election analyst for the NBC News Decision Desk. Welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.
So before we talk about what you found on Gen Z voters, let's take a look at the top line numbers of what you found among all demographics in this survey. When you asked about President Trump's job approval, 63% disapproving, 37% approving. That's significant in its movement.
Yeah, that's a tick lower than it was in January when we last did this poll. So in January, we had 39% approval again. That was right in the wake of the two shootings in Minneapolis. So it's pretty telling that even in a moment of relative calm, we're still down about 2% than we were in January.
Let's dive in now to what you found with Gen Z voters about President Trump's approval rating. Here you see a more dramatic split, 76% disapproving, 24% approving.
Yeah, that's right. And every time we've done this poll in April and August of last year, we've seen Gen Z have a lower approval rate than other generations. That's not surprising. But what is that this generation has moved against the president faster than any other generation. So in August, for example, this number was 36%. This is a 12-point shift in their overall approval since August of last year.
And when you're talking Gen Z, you define that as between 18 and 29.
That's right.
And you also found a pretty significant gender gap here.
Absolutely. The gender gap in Gen Z is the biggest gender gap amongst any generation. And so, we see women Gen Z strongly disapprove of the president, just over 70% compared to 50% of Gen Z men. That gap is bigger than any other generation.
All right, let's dig a little deeper into some specific issues and talk about the war with Iran. President Trump's handling of the war with Iran, 81% disapproving, 19% approving here. Again, this is college-aged voters and maybe a little bit older than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think when we look at the war in Iran, we can't separate it from feelings about inflation and the economy. These two things are linked. And when we looked at overall approval for inflation, that was also something that was lower than Trump's overall approval numbers, right? So it's really these two issues, Iran and inflation, that people are reacting to and saying that this is what we disapprove of. And we see, the number one issue is the economy. The number one economics issue is inflation. And those are the things that are hurting the president.
They're showing up with Gen Z as well as with
across
other
generations. Absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk about looking forward, what these voters think, whether the U.S. is on the wrong track or the right track. 80% saying the country is on the wrong track, 20% saying that it is on the right track here. What does this split tell you?
Yeah, so absolutely. So very similar to how they felt about the approval of the president overall, this is the most pessimistic generation about how they feel things are in the country are going. One particularly striking thing with this number, though, is when we split this out by party, right? We expect Democrats think the country's on the wrong track. Independents think the country's on the wrong track. For Gen Z Republicans, 49%, just about half say that the country's on the wrong track, and that's the members of the president's own party.
And that's interesting also because so many members of this generation are choosing not to go with a party. They're choosing to be independent, non-affiliated voters. So these are voters who are saying they are Republicans.
Absolutely. And this is the group that has moved the most since August, right? That independents and Democrats already had a negative feeling towards the president, already had a negative feeling towards the direction of the country. It's really the Republicans are the last group to move, and they're the ones that are moving against the president now.
Interesting. So you found an almost 50-50 split with them. We got one more thing to take a look at, and this This is looking ahead to what they think their future is going to be. Do you expect life for your generation to be worse than previous generations, better than previous generations, or about the same? And we've got, again, some pessimism.
Absolutely, right? So 62%, a clear majority, think that their life is going to be worse than previous generations. And this is a question that really has big differences by generations when we look at Gen Z versus millennials versus Gen X versus baby boomers. So, for example, only 35% of baby boomers say that their life is going to be worse than the generation before them. That's just a huge difference in kind of their optimism towards what their life's going to be like and if things are going to go on the right track or not.
All right, interesting stuff. Mark Tressler from the NBC News Decision Desk. We'll be watching for the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you find politics stressful? Muhlenberg College asked Pennsylvanians about that recently. This week, I visited the campus and I talked to Christopher Borick. He's the director of the Institute of Public Opinion. Let's talk about this new poll that you have out. And in particular, I wanted to ask you first about the question that you asked, basically about politics stressing people out. What did you find?
Yeah, so we do an annual poll in Pennsylvania about Pennsylvania's perceptions of health issues broadly defined. So we look at an array of issues on affordability, access, specific policies. And one of the questions we've asked the last few years, given that Pennsylvania is so crucial in the world of politics, is what effect is politics having on your health? And the question we ask is politics and current events a major source of stress in your life, a minor source, or not a stress at all? And we saw over the last year the percentage of Pennsylvanians that said it's a major stress rise significantly. And that's by itself notable. But what's really interesting is the divide in who's saying it is a major source of stress. There's an enormous divide between Democrats and Republicans and how they say politics is acting as a source of stress, with Democrats much more likely than Republicans to say so. And that's not uncommon, right? When you are in the out party, that the in party, which is calling the shots, in this case the Republicans, might be making decisions that make you feel uncomfortable. But the divide is so gigantic right now, and that could have implications.
Yeah, how does that translate? What have you seen in the past about how that translates into whether people show up to vote?
It's a good predictor of turnout in terms of elections. People, it sounds maybe counterintuitive, but if you're stressed and worried, it translates into action in terms of polls. It helps the energy for a reason to turn out. And so this year, in a midterm election cycle, where we see general indicators, we ask people how enthusiastic they are. That's one telling sign. But if you're stressed and you're angry and you're feeling that politics is really affecting your mental health, you are, in some ways, more likely to actually act on that. And what does act mean? Turning out in elections, primaries, general elections.
If people say they're stressed at this point in the year, does that stress have a tendency to linger on into the year, or what have you found? Is it usually short-lived?
No, it's not right now, because again, the role of politics in our lives, I think, has been really pushed forward, especially here in Pennsylvania, a place that's so competitive politically. I would guess we'll probably ask a similar question in the fall in one of our election polls, just to see and track where it's going. My suspicion, it'll be fairly similar to what we saw in the spring in terms of the state. Now, maybe something could happen that intervenes in that, but that'd be pretty significant change. So I'm anticipating you'll probably see those stress levels, especially among Democrats, be a factor in driving people to the polls come November.
Political prescription. A local doctor who rose to prominence for her work during the pandemic is now running for Congress. Part of my one-on-one interview with Dr. Ayla Stanford coming up.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
Philadelphia voters are choosing a new member of Congress to replace retiring Congressman Dwight Evans. In this heavily blue district, there is a competitive primary. 4 candidates are in the running, and we're sitting down with each of them. You'll be able to watch the interviews on my Battleground Politics podcast, and here on NBC10 at Issue, we're bringing you parts of those interviews in the order they appear on the ballot. We start this week with Dr. Ayla Stanford. She founded the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. She also served in the Department of Health and Human Services in the Biden administration. First thing I want to talk about is what would be the most important thing that you would do in representing Philadelphia if you are elected to Congress?
So the most important thing I would do, because what people are telling me is that everything is too expensive, that they have gotten dropped off their health insurance, that gas is high, that they can't afford childcare, and it's tough to work. And so what that would mean for me as a congresswoman is I have to restore the cuts to the Affordable Care Act, where thousands of people have been dropped off their insurance. What it means is that I have to vote against the war that is spending $1.4 billion per day when we need those funds here, and we need to reduce the costs that many of my constituents are saying are problematic right now. So those are the two things that are legislative. But from a leadership standpoint, what's happening in Health and Human Services with a non-qualified leader as Secretary of Health is that we're seeing more cases of measles. We're seeing death from measles when we have not seen that in decades. And there's a direct cause and effect of what he's doing. And I will stand up to that as a subject matter expert in the space.
What then do you say to voters who may have voted for other people in the race,
Sure.
And have been happy with their performance in the other jobs that they're doing for them? Why should they not choose them if they voted for them before?
So what I would say is when you look at true leadership, sometimes it's leading without a title. And we had many people in 2020 through 2022 that had titles that did not lead when it matters most. We have not had something that faced the city and the nation like the pandemic, the world's worst by all accounts pandemic. And that's when you needed people to step in. The only reason why people in Philadelphia and across the nation know my name is from service. I am a pediatric surgeon that is typically in an operating room. And the reason why they know my name is because those elected officials that they chose to lead them, for folks that voted for them, were not doing their job, period. I don't think anyone disputes that. Now, many will say, well, we supported your efforts. However, I had to first have the courage and the vision to step out in a space where no help was coming for a city and particular communities that were dying at a rate 4 times greater than anyone else.
Let's talk about some of the other things that you would do if you're elected and promises that you've made in this race. And I'm going to go right to an ad that you just put out. And you said you are running to stop Trump. That's one of the things that you said you were running to do.
Absolutely.
What does that mean? What are you going to stop?
So specifically, it's his illegal and unconstitutional things that he has brought forth, number one. Number two, it's the $145 million cuts that he has made to Medicaid and Medicare. He cut the Head Start program. He disintegrated the Department of Education. So one,
you're saying I'm running to stop Trump. What are you going to do to stop him?
So I agree with you, and people say that all the time. Suing him has happened, and he's still there. Impeachment has happened, and he's still there. And so what it means is we have to take control of the House. With the vote that just came through in Virginia, with the redistricting that favored Democrats, that's one way that all but assures that we will. Our seat is also a blue seat. So collectively, when we come together, and also with the bipartisan support that is happening, is going to allow us to vote against in a majority to be able to stop, again, the illegal, unconstitutional war, to be able to work towards impeachment and resigning of the current Secretary of Health, which is bringing forth harmful recommendations to our nation. And with the funding of the $1.4 billion per day that's going towards the war will allow us to focus more on our health care and education and the other areas where the funds have been pulled.
You also said you're running to bring down costs. How specifically would you do that?
Well, I mean, it's almost like everything is sort of wrapped into this $1.4 billion per day spending that is happening right now. So if he doesn't have funds through DHS to continue, if we are able to stop the funds that are going into the war, then that allows the cost to come down for gas. It allows us to be able to refund the health care that millions have been taken, and now folks are going and they can't get the prescribed care that's been offered by their clinicians. It means that we're able to put more into our housing subsidies so that folks can be first-time homeowners. It means that we're able to fund, again, I'm going back to education, which directly is linked to safety in our communities.
You also said you're running to abolish ICE. This is something that we've heard other Democrats and activists talk about.
Yeah.
From an immigration enforcement perspective,
Yes.
who do you think should be in charge of enforcing immigration laws?
It's a good question. And you can pause because I just want to think about it for a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
We need to continue, though.
Okay. Who do I think should be in charge of enforcing immigration laws? Not the executive branch, so not the president. So it belongs with Congress. It belongs with Congress because the executive branch, and specifically the president, is self-serving. And many of the decisions that he is making is not about the American people, is not about our safety. It's not because there's imminent threat. It's not because we think there's a nuclear weapon coming to the United States. It's for his personal gain and his personal relationships, and he's shown that over and over again.
But who should be on the ground enforcing? I mean, there are immigration laws.
Absolutely.
In this country and a border. Who, if it's not ICE, if you've abolished ICE,
understood.
Who handles it? Who enforces those laws? Who enforces the border?
So you can't, once you abolish, you have to rebuild. We're at a point where you can't reform something that is a paramilitary organization that is taking human life.
So are
that
you
they
saying
have
there's a
no
new ICE?
discernment. I'm saying that I wouldn't even use that. I think at this point, the connotation of that word is so negative that you would need a new name. And I just want to push back a little bit. You know, people who come to this country add value and diversify and have helped build the United States. When they're fleeing to come to the United States, it's supposed to be a sanctuary, not a living hell. And we can protect our borders without taking human life. And so I would put the subject matter experts around me who are more knowledgeable in this space to say, how do we not repeat the errors of the past and build? And with the goal being that not only do we protect our borders, but we're also preserving human life. We're not taking it, and we're providing the adjunct services in legal and in health and in housing and in education for anyone who comes through our doors. And so those are the tenets, not necessarily the people who would lead it, but those are the values that must be contained in what we create.
You can see much more of my interview with Dr. Ayla Stanford on a recent episode of my Battleground Politics podcast. And we've also posted episodes with my interviews with the other three candidates in the race. A new plan to ease the growing pain at the pump. The change a local lawmaker is proposing that he says could lower prices. But how much effect would it really have? NBC10 Responds breaks it down next.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
We're back now on NBC10 at Issue with a new plan to offer some relief at the pump. NBC10 Responds was there for the announcement, and Valeria Ponte-Feliciano breaks down the proposal.
So we have good news.
Congressman Brendan Boyle was at the Mayfair gas station to announce the Gas Price Relief Act. It would reduce or eliminate the 18.4-cent federal gas tax whenever the national average exceeds $4 a gallon. For example, the $4.11 for gas at this station on Tyson Avenue would then be $3.99 with a reduced tax under the legislation. If gas is $4.18 or higher, the total federal gas tax would be subtracted, but drivers will have to wait to feel the impact.
It would take effect within 30 days of passage, but obviously the bill would need to pass the House, pass the Senate, and be signed into law by the President. I think that once more word gets out about this legislation, it will be popular.
Vincent Jordan was filling up at the pump after Boyle's announcement. He says every little bit helps when it comes to saving on gas.
It's just really tough. It's been an impediment on my budget in terms of being able to do other things and so forth.
Valeria Pontefeliciano, NBC10 responds.
Congressman Boyle can propose changes on a federal level, but states have their own gas tax. Pennsylvania's state taxes and fees total 59 cents. In New Jersey, it's 49 cents, and Delaware's total comes to 41 cents. And we haven't heard of any efforts to suspend those taxes. We'll be right back with some important dates to keep in mind if you plan to vote in your state's upcoming primary.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
The Pennsylvania primary is just a few weeks away, and officials this past week reminded people about the different ways they can exercise their right to vote. On Tuesday, District Attorney Larry Krasner joined with the chairman of the City Commissioners, Omar Sabir, to help get the word out. They visited one of the City Commissioners' satellite locations in North Philadelphia. Voters can go to one of those offices to register to vote. You can also go there to apply for and receive a mail-in ballot, and you can fill out that ballot and drop it off all in one visit. The deadline to register to vote in the Pennsylvania primary is May 4th. To vote in the New Jersey primary, you have until May 12th to register, and Delaware voters have until August 22nd to register to vote in that state's primary election. That does it for this edition of NBC10 at Issue. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.